On March 19, 1994, 11 people were killed by explosives at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds in North St. Louis. The victims were members of a gang crew that had vandalized a memorial wall, a wall built to honor fallen neighbors, a proud symbol of survival in a city that had long abandoned them. The method was systematic, brutal, and calculated, using homemade explosives rigged directly into the memorial itself that detonated when the vandals returned. The perpetrators were the Hammond brothers, David, Marcus, and Isaiah, 3 brothers born into the roughest conditions, bonded by a shared sense of duty to protect what little their father left behind. The St. Louis Police Department would later call it one of the most shocking acts of calculated revenge the city had ever seen. But the reason wasn't gang retaliation, wasn't a drug dispute, wasn't even a turf war. It was honor. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains shocking events. North St. Louis in 1994 was a place that had long since surrendered to decay. The city's population stood at 396,685, but nearly 40,000 of those souls were concentrated in the neglected northern districts where the Hammond family lived. The economic collapse hit hard. Unemployment hovered at 23% in the region, and the manufacturing industry that had sustained families for 3 generations had either outsourced or simply shut down. McDonnell Douglas had laid off 8,700 workers in 1992 alone. The brewery district, once employing 12,000 men, now employed 340. The neighborhood was a mix of deteriorating brick row houses, aging buildings with broken windows that caught the morning light like shattered teeth, and the sound of distant sirens echoing through the night. The streets smelled of industrial rust from the abandoned foundries, mixed with burnt rubber from the tire fire that had smoldered for 6 weeks at the old Goodrich plant. In summer, the scent of hot asphalt and rotting garbage from overflowing dumpsters hung in the air. The city had reduced trash pickup to once every 2 weeks. There was no beauty in the place, only survival. The police were outnumbered and outgunned. The entire northern district had 17 patrol officers covering 8.4 square miles. Response times averaged 42 minutes. Cases went cold. Detectives were reassigned. The corruption wasn't malicious so much as exhausted. Officers stopped writing reports that would never be read, investigating crimes that would never be solved, arresting dealers who would be back on corners within 6 hours. In this vacuum, the notion of respect became currency. Reputation meant protection. If you lost your honor, you became invisible. And in North St. Louis in 1994, invisibility meant death. The code was simple. Protect your family, defend your name, and never let a public insult stand unanswered. This wasn't machismo or bravado. It was survival mathematics. The Hammond brothers, like many in their community, valued the legacy of family and the necessity of facing challenges head-on, because the alternative was to be consumed by a world that had already forgotten them. This was the broken world the brothers inhabited, a world where personal codes passed down through generations meant more than the empty promises of aldermen or the decrepit state of the justice system. David Hammond, 36 years old, was the eldest brother. Tall and broad-shouldered, standing at 6'3" with a commanding presence that filled doorways, he wore responsibility like a second skin. A scar traced his left cheek from jaw to ear, a reminder of a knife fight when he was 14 with a neighbor kid who'd called his mother a name David wouldn't repeat. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in certain light, sharp and calculating, always watching, always thinking. Each morning at 5:30 a.m., David woke to the smell of burnt Folgers from a percolator his father had used since 1967. The pot was dented on one side from the time his father had thrown it at a wall during an argument David barely remembered. He'd repair it with electrical tape every few months when the tape wore through. He liked the routine of it, the familiar hiss, the bitter smell, the silence before the world woke up. He worked at Sullivan's Auto Repair on Kings Highway, a shop that had been there since 1952. David had been there for 11 years, 6 days a week, $7 an hour. He specialized in transmission work, the intricate puzzle of gears and clutches that most mechanics avoided. His hands were scarred from burns and cuts, calloused from years of wrestling with seized bolts and hot metal. He'd lost the tip of his left index finger to a fan belt in 1989. The finger had a strange, blunt quality now that made him self-conscious when he shook hands. Before Sullivan's, he'd worked at the Chevrolet plant in Fenton for 3 years until they closed his line. Before that, the Army. David had served 6 years, including 7 months in the Persian Gulf in 1991 with the 101st Airborne. He'd seen things in Kuwait he couldn't explain to people who hadn't been there. The smell of burning oil fields, so thick it turned day into twilight. The bodies of retreating Iraqi soldiers on Highway 80, charred beyond recognition, their hands reaching toward nothing. He'd learned discipline in the Army, and precision, and the importance of completing your mission regardless of how you felt about it. He'd also learned demolitions, how to rig ambushes, how to turn ordinary terrain into kill zones. David had never married. He lived with his 2 younger brothers in the house their father had left them, a narrow brick row house on Hebert Street with a front porch that sagged on the left side. The house had been built in 1923. The foundation was cracked. The roof leaked in the back bedroom. David patched it every spring with tar paper and hope. Marcus was 32, leaner than David, quick-tempered where David was measured. He worked sporadically, mostly construction jobs that lasted a few weeks before the money ran out or the contractor disappeared. Isaiah was 29, the youngest, who'd done 2 years at Farmington Correctional for possession with intent. He'd been out for 14 months and was trying to stay clean, working overnight shifts, stocking shelves at the shop and save on Goodfellow. Their father, William Hammond, had died in 1989 of a heart attack while carrying groceries up the front steps. He'd been 58 years old. He'd worked 34 years at the Skull and Steel plant before it closed. He'd raised 3 sons alone after their mother had died of breast cancer in 1976. David had been 18, Marcus 14, Isaiah 11. What David valued most wasn't money. Money came and went, mostly went. What he valued was the principle his father had drilled into him since childhood. A man's word and a man's name were all he truly owned, and if he lost those, he was already dead. William Hammond had lived by that code. He'd never stolen, never lied to a man's face, never failed to pay a debt. He'd taught his sons that reputation was the only inheritance that mattered. 2 weeks before he died, William had shaken David's hand on the porch and said, "You're the oldest. When I'm gone, you look after your brothers. You keep this family's name clean." "I will," David had said. It was the last promise he'd made to his father. 5 years after William's death, that promise was all David had left. The wall stood at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds, a memorial built from reclaimed bricks and concrete in 1981. William Hammond had built it himself with help from neighbors, working weekends for 4 months. It honored 17 people from the neighborhood who died young. 17 names carved into concrete. 17 lives that had mattered to someone. There was Jerome Willis, shot by police in 1978 during a traffic stop. Angela Freeman, dead at 19 from an overdose. Marcus Little, David's childhood friend, stabbed outside a bar in 1980. The wall was 8 feet tall and 22 feet long, positioned on the southwest corner of the intersection. Behind it was an abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds, littered with the debris of a neighborhood the city had forgotten. An old furniture warehouse stood empty on the east side, its windows long since broken out. To the north, a boarded-up liquor store. The corner was isolated, visible from the street but surrounded by abandonment. The wall wasn't valuable in any monetary sense. The materials had cost maybe $400, but its historical significance was irreplaceable. It represented the Hammond family's survival, the memory of William's sacrifice, and the pride they took in honoring those the city had forgotten. The wall said, "We were here, we mattered, we remember." David drove past it every morning on his way to work, every evening on his way home. He'd helped his father mix concrete when he was 23. His hands had smoothed the surface. His back had ached from carrying bricks. He could still remember his father standing back, surveying the finished work, saying, "This'll outlast us both, son. Long after we're gone, people will remember." The wall was the last physical thing his father had created. On March 5th, 1994, a Saturday afternoon, someone spray-painted it with gang tags. The vandals were part of a crew that operated out of the Pruitt-Igoe Apartments remnants, young men between 17 and 26 who called themselves the Fairground Boys. They dealt crack cocaine on Natural Bridge, ran numbers, and occasionally robbed liquor stores with varying degrees of success. They were not evil by nature. They were products of the same failed system that had ground down the Hammonds, forced into a life where violence and crime were sometimes the only visible options for survival. The primary figure was Tyrell T. Jensen, 24 years old. T was wiry and quick, 5'9" with a sharp tongue and a reputation for talking his way out of trouble. His mother had died of AIDS when he was 11. His father had abandoned the family when T was 6, disappearing somewhere into East St. Louis, never to return. T had been raised by his grandmother until she died in 1991. After that, he'd been on his own. T worked occasionally at a car wash on Kings Highway, the same street where David worked 3 blocks south. They'd crossed paths dozens of times, nodding at each other in passing. 2 men from the same broken world, navigating the same broken streets. There'd been no animosity between them, no history, just the mutual recognition of shared circumstances. T had several main associates. Jerome Little, 28, who'd just gotten a job interview at the lumber mill on Gravois and had ironed his best shirt the night before. Ray Douglas, 23, whose girlfriend was 5 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they'd already named Keisha. Marcus Boyd, 26, whose mother was planning his birthday party for the following weekend. Kevin Washington, 19, who'd enrolled in community college for the fall semester to study automotive repair. Dante Cole, 22, who was planning to propose to his girlfriend in 2 weeks and had the ring hidden in his sock drawer. Rashad Turner, 25, who sent $40 to his grandmother every week for groceries and medicine. They weren't monsters. They were men trying to survive in a city that had given up on them, making choices that seemed logical within the confined mathematics of their options. The intersection with the Hammond brothers had been neutral until March 5th. That Saturday, T and 10 others approached the memorial wall in broad daylight. It was 2:47 p.m. The temperature was 63 degrees. A light wind carried the smell of fried chicken from a nearby restaurant. David was there. He'd stopped at the corner store for cigarettes, Marlboro Reds, and was walking back to his truck when he saw them. T had a can of spray paint, red Krylon. 2 others had black cans. They were laughing, talking loud, performing for each other. David stopped 20 feet away, paper bag with cigarettes in his right hand, keys in his left. "Yo, check this out," one of them said, spraying a crude symbol over William Hammond's name at the bottom of the wall. David's chest tightened. His grip on the keys made his knuckles white. "That's a memorial," David said, voice level. T turned, recognized David vaguely, the auto mechanic from down the street. "Man, we're just having fun," T said, grinning. "That's my father's wall," David said. The laughter stopped. T looked at the wall, then back at David. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation happening behind his eyes. He could back down now, apologize, and walk away. But there were 10 others watching, and backing down meant losing face, which, in their world, meant becoming prey. "Your father?" T said, louder now, performing for his crew. "Where's your father at?" "He's dead," David said. "Then he don't need a wall," T said. The others laughed. One of them, Ray Douglas, threw an empty beer bottle that shattered against the bricks, right below Angela Freeman's name. 17 people watched from porches, stoops, and windows. 17 witnesses to David Hammond being disrespected in public, in front of his father's memorial, by men young enough to be his sons. They watched David stand there, fists clenched, jaw tight, saying nothing. They watched him not fight back, not react, just stand there absorbing the humiliation like blows to the body. "You gonna cry about it?" T said, stepping closer. David looked at him, looked at the wall, looked at the witnesses watching from their porches, felt the weight of every eye on him, judging, measuring, waiting to see if David Hammond was a man who could be disrespected without consequence. Marcus Boyd stepped forward, adding his own tag below David's feet. Dante Cole laughed and sprayed the words, "Rip Old Man," across the center of the memorial. Jerome Little threw another bottle. Kevin Washington filmed it on a camcorder, laughing, saying he was going to show it to everyone. David turned and walked back to his truck. Behind him, the laughter continued. Someone sprayed another tag. Someone else threw another bottle. T called after him, "Come back any time, old man. We'll be here." David drove home in silence. His hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear. From rage so pure and cold, it felt like clarity. The following Monday, David went to the North Patrol Station on Riverview Boulevard. He explained what had happened to a desk sergeant named Collins, a heavy-set man in his 50s, who'd been on the force for 23 years and had the exhausted look of someone who'd stopped believing paperwork mattered. "They vandalized your father's memorial," Collins repeated, writing nothing down. "Yes, sir," David said. "You know who did it?" "Tyrell Jensen and his crew. They call themselves the Fairground Boys. 11 of them. I can give you names." Collins sighed, put his pen down. "Mr. Hammond, I understand you're upset, but this is vandalism. Property crime. We got murders we can't solve. We got 3 open rape cases. We got a drive-by from last week with 4 witnesses who won't talk. You understand what I'm saying?" "I'm asking for help," David said. "File a report. We'll add it to the pile. And then what?" Collins looked at him with something like sympathy. "Then probably nothing," he said. "I'm being honest with you. We don't have the manpower. This is a wall. Nobody got hurt. It's my father's memorial. I understand that. But it's city property, technically. You'd need to file a complaint with Public Works, get them to assess damages. Then we could maybe pursue charges if we can prove who did it. That's months of paperwork, maybe a year. And even then, it's a misdemeanor. They'd get community service." David stood there, hat in his hands, understanding perfectly that the law had no mechanism to protect what mattered to him. "Is there anything you can do?" David asked, already knowing the answer. "Honestly, get some paint. Cover the tags. Move on." David left the station at 4:17 p.m. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 11 minutes, not moving, not thinking, just existing in the cold understanding that he was alone in this. That evening, David called his brothers to the kitchen. It was 8:32 p.m. The house smelled of the TV dinner Isaiah had microwaved, Salisbury steak, and the coffee David had made in their father's percolator. The fluorescent light overhead hummed and flickered, a sound so familiar they didn't hear it anymore. The linoleum floor was cracked in a pattern that looked like a river delta. Marcus sat at the table, smoking a Camel. Isaiah stood near the sink, arms crossed. "They tagged Dad's wall," David said, voice quiet. "I heard," Marcus said. "I went to the police. And? They don't care." Silence. The refrigerator kicked on with a low hum. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off, then stopped. "So what are we doing?" Marcus asked. David looked at his brothers. Marcus met his eyes. Isaiah looked at the floor. "We send a message," David said. "We make sure nobody ever disrespects our family again." "How?" Marcus asked. David was quiet for a moment, thinking about his training in the Gulf, about ambush tactics and kill zones, about turning terrain into a weapon. "They'll come back," David said. T said it himself. "We'll be here." They think it's funny. They think they can do whatever they want to that wall. So we let them come back, and we make sure they never leave. Isaiah shifted his weight. "Dad wouldn't want this," Isaiah said. David turned to him. "Dad built that wall with his own hands," David said. "He spent 4 months on it. He put every neighbor we lost on that wall. And these punks come along and laugh at it. Laugh at him. Film it. Make a joke out of it. In front of the whole neighborhood." "There's other ways," Isaiah said. "Like what?" "The police don't care. The city don't care. You want me to just let it go? Let everyone see that you can disrespect our family and nothing happens? I'm saying maybe it's not worth dying over." "It's not about dying," David said. "It's about living. About whether we're men who stand for something or we're just taking up space." Marcus stubbed out his cigarette. "How do we do it?" he asked. David pulled out a piece of paper, a rough sketch of the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds. The wall, the abandoned lot behind it, the empty warehouse. "We rigged the wall," David said. "Turn the whole corner into a trap. When they come back to finish what they started, we finish them." "All of them?" Marcus asked. "Every single one who was there," David said. Isaiah looked at his brothers, looked at the table where their father used to sit, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, looked at the empty chair. "You really think they'll come back?" Isaiah asked. "I know they will," David said. "T told me they'd be there. He's probably already planning it. Gonna bring everyone back, make it a party, really deface it this time. Show the whole neighborhood that the Hammonds won't do nothing about it." "When?" "This weekend. Saturday. Same time as before. That's when they operate. When people are watching." Marcus lit another cigarette. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. What David didn't know, sitting at that kitchen table with his brothers, making plans in quiet voices while the coffee grew cold, was that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would leave 11 people dead in a single explosion, and the Hammond brothers either in prison or dead themselves. That the wall he would kill to defend would be demolished by the city 6 months later to make room for a highway expansion that would never be built. That the thing he valued most, his father's legacy, would end up as rubble in a landfill, forgotten by everyone except the families of the people he'd killed. The preparation began the next morning. David started with reconnaissance, spending hours at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds, measuring distances, studying sight lines, understanding the terrain the way he'd been taught in the Army. The abandoned lot behind the wall was overgrown but accessible. The warehouse to the east had a service door hanging off its hinges, perfect for concealment, for staging equipment, for setting up the ambush. He took notes in a small spiral notebook, drew diagrams, calculated blast radii. The wall itself was 8 feet tall, 22 feet long, made of brick and concrete, structurally sound enough to hide devices behind. The corner was isolated enough that collateral damage would be minimal. The nearest occupied building was 180 feet away. Marcus helped with surveillance. For 3 days, they watched the fairground boys' patterns. T and his crew gathered at the same locations, mostly the corner of Natural Bridge and Cass, sometimes at the car wash, often at the wall itself. On Wednesday afternoon, Marcus watched as 4 of them returned to the memorial, adding more tags, laughing, taking pictures, sending a message. "We own this corner now." "They're not scared," Marcus reported that evening. "They think it's a joke." "Good," David said. "Let them think that." On Thursday, David drove to 3 different locations to acquire materials. First, Bud's gun shop in Festurus, 30 miles south. The shop was in a strip mall between a Dollar General and a Chinese restaurant. Inside smelled like gun oil and cardboard. A man named Gary worked the counter, mid-50s, heavy set, wearing a Cardinals cap. "Help you?" Gary asked. "Need tannerite," David said, "for clearing stumps on my property." "How much property you got?" 40 acres. Inherited it from my father. Got maybe 20 old stumps need removing." Gary nodded, pulled boxes from a back room. Tannerite was legal, sold as a binary explosive for target practice. Mixed together, it became unstable, detonating on impact. "This'll do you," Gary said, setting out 12 pounds. "I'll take 30, David said. Gary's expression shifted slightly. "That's a lot of stumps." "Like I said, it's a lot of property. Don't want to make multiple trips." Gary shrugged and rang him up. $340. David paid cash. At a hardware store in St. Charles, David bought 50 feet of day cord, claiming he was in demolition. The clerk didn't ask questions. At a sporting goods store in Florissant, he bought ball bearings and steel nuts, saying he was rebuilding a piece of machinery. At an electronics supply shop, he bought wire, batteries, and remote detonators, claiming he was working on a model airplane project. Separately, the purchases were unremarkable. Together, they were components of a devastating anti-personnel device. In the basement of the house on Heber Street, David assembled the trap using skills he'd learned in Army demolition training. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. Tannerite charges positioned behind the wall itself, packed with ball bearings and steel fragments to maximize shrapnel. Date cord running through the brick structure, connecting multiple charges to ensure simultaneous detonation. A remote trigger with a range of 200 meters. The wall itself would become the weapon. When the charges detonated, the bricks and concrete would fragment outward in a directional blast, turning William Hammond's memorial into a claymore mine on a massive scale. Anyone standing within 15 feet of the wall would die instantly. Anyone within 30 feet would sustain fatal injuries. Marcus watched, smoking cigarettes and drinking Budweiser from a can. Isaiah stayed upstairs, unable to watch, knowing what was being built but unable to stop it. "You sure about the yield?" Marcus asked. "I'm sure," David said, checking connections with a multimeter. 30 pounds of tannerite, directional blast, confined by the brick structure. It'll be instantaneous. They won't feel it? They won't know what happened. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's mercy, right?" he asked. "Making it quick?" David didn't answer. Mercy wasn't the word he'd use. Justice, maybe. Retribution. The settling of accounts in a world where the law meant nothing and reputation meant everything. On Friday evening, March 18th, David made his final preparations. He loaded equipment into his truck at 11:47 p.m., when the neighborhood was asleep. Marcus drove separately in the borrowed Pontiac, following at a distance. They arrived at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds at 12:23 a.m. The street was empty. The temperature was 54 degrees. A light wind carried the smell of rain. David parked in the abandoned lot behind the wall, out of sight from the street. He worked quickly and precisely, the way he'd been trained. Removed loose bricks from the base of the wall, creating cavities. Inserted the tannerite charges, packed with ball bearings and fragments. Ran det cord through the structure, connecting everything to a central detonator. Replaced the bricks carefully, making sure nothing looked disturbed. The whole setup took 47 minutes. Marcus kept watch from the warehouse, radio in hand, ready to warn if anyone approached. Nobody did. The corner was abandoned, forgotten, the perfect place for an ambush. When David finished, he stepped back and examined his work. The wall looked exactly as it had before, covered in spray paint and disrespect. But now, it was a loaded weapon, waiting for someone to trigger it. All David had to do was wait for the fairground boys to return, to stand in front of the wall one more time, and press a button. "It's done," David said into the radio. "Jesus," Marcus said. They left the corner at 1:34 a.m., driving separately, leaving no trace except the trap embedded in their father's memorial. Back at the house on Hebert Street, David sat on the porch in the darkness. The remote detonator was in his jacket pocket, a small device with a single red button. He held it, feeling its weight, understanding that once he pressed it, there would be no going back. Mrs. Washington's porch light came on next door. She stepped outside in her bathrobe, saw David sitting in the dark. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "No, ma'am," David said. She walked over slowly, joints stiff from arthritis, sat down on the porch steps beside him. "David, I know that look," she said. "Your father had that look before he went after those boys who broke into our house in '84. I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. And I'm telling you, whatever you're thinking about doing, it ain't worth it. They disrespected my father's memorial. I know, I saw, and it's shameful. But David, once you cross certain lines, you can't come back. Your father learned that. He spent 6 months in county over those boys, nearly lost his job, nearly lost this house, and for what? For his dignity," David said. "His dignity was intact before he threw that first punch," she said. "What he lost by choosing violence. And you're contemplating something worse than a fistfight. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever you got planned, people are going to die. And you're going to have to live with that every single day for the rest of your life." David looked at her. She had kind eyes, worn with decades of witnessing suffering. "I made my father a promise," David said, "to look after this family, to keep our name clean. And you think killing folks is going to do that?" "I think letting them disrespect us without consequence is worse than dying." Mrs. Washington reached out and put her hand on his. "Then God help you," she said, "because nobody else can." She stood slowly, walked back to her house, and turned off the porch light. David sat alone in the darkness, holding the detonator, waiting for Saturday. The word spread through the neighborhood on Saturday morning, March 19th, whispered from porch to porch, passed along in phone calls and quick conversations. The fairground boys were coming back to the wall. T had been talking about it all week, bragging that they were going to finish the job, cover every inch of the memorial with tags, maybe tear some of it down. Make it clear that the corner belonged to them now, that the Hammond family couldn't stop them. By noon, everyone knew. By 2 p.m., people were positioning themselves on porches and stoops, waiting to see what would happen. Some hoped the police would show up, stop it before it started. Most knew better. David, Marcus, and Isaiah were in the empty warehouse across from the wall by 1:30 p.m. They'd entered through the service door, climbed to the second floor, and positioned themselves by the broken windows overlooking Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds. David had the remote detonator. Marcus had binoculars. Isaiah sat against the wall, head in his hands, praying quietly. "You don't have to be here," David said to Isaiah. "Yes, I do," Isaiah said. "We're brothers. If you're doing this, I'm here." The temperature was 61 degrees, partly cloudy. The smell of cooking meat drifted from a nearby house, someone grilling in their backyard, unaware of what was about to happen. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 1 week after the first vandalism, T. Jensen and 10 others arrived at the corner. T was wearing a red jacket and white sneakers, the Nikes he'd finally saved enough to buy. Jerome Little was there, the job interview just 2 days away. Ray Douglas arrived with his pregnant girlfriend, Tamika, showing her what they'd done, laughing about it. Marcus Boyd carried a boombox playing rap music. Kevin Washington had his camcorder again, filming everything. Dante Cole was there with his girlfriend Sharon, the ring still hidden in his sock drawer for another week. Rashad Turner was there, Antonio Price. 2 others whose names David didn't know. 11 people total. They gathered in front of the wall, close together, examining their previous work, planning where to add more tags. T sprayed the first line, a crude drawing right over William Hammond's name. The others laughed, passed around bottles of beer, performed for each other and for the neighborhood witnesses watching from a distance. "Yo, check this," T said, spraying "Fairground Boys Own This" across the center of the memorial. David watched from the warehouse window. His heart rate was steady, his breathing calm. He'd done this before in the Gulf, watched targets gather in a kill zone, waited for the optimal moment to strike. "They're all there," Marcus said, looking through the binoculars. "All 11. David pulled the detonator from his pocket. It was a simple device, a black box with a single red button. Range tested to 200 meters. Reliable. Fail-safe. He'd tested the circuit 7 times. It would work. Below, Ray Douglas put his arm around Tamika, pointing at the wall, explaining which tags were his. She laughed, hand on her belly. 5 months pregnant with Keisha. Completely unaware that she had 90 seconds left with the father of her child. Jerome Little was filming with Kevin's camera now, narrating for the video, saying, "This is how we do it in North St. Louis. No respect for dead people." He had the job interview scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m., the ironed shirt hanging on his bedroom door, a future that was 47 hours away. Dante Cole was spray painting a heart with his and Sharon's initials inside it, making her laugh. The same hand that would have held a ring in 2 weeks when he proposed at her favorite restaurant, a moment that would never arrive. Marcus Boyd turned up the boombox, music echoing off the abandoned buildings, celebrating their conquest of the corner. His mother at home preparing ingredients for his birthday party next weekend, a party that would become a funeral. Kevin Washington filmed everything, capturing evidence that would later be used to identify the victims, documenting his own final moments without knowing it. Rashad Turner was counting money, probably calculating how much to send his grandmother next week. $40 he'd never send because he'd never see another paycheck. Antonio Price stood at the edge, slightly separate from the group, uncomfortable, looking like he wanted to leave but couldn't without losing face. T stood in the center, arms raised, performing, the leader of his crew, master of this corner, king of a forgotten intersection in a forgotten neighborhood. "You sure?" Marcus asked, hand on David's shoulder. David watched them laugh and spray paint and celebrate their disrespect of his father's memorial. Watched them stand in the exact place where William Hammond had stood in 1981, proud of his work, proud of honoring the dead. "I'm sure," David said. He pressed the button. 8:47 p.m., March 19th, 1994. The explosion was simultaneous and devastating. 30 pounds of tannerite detonated in a directional blast, the wall itself fragmenting into thousands of pieces of brick, concrete, and steel. The sound was enormous, a crack like thunder that echoed for miles. Windows shattered for 3 blocks, car alarms triggered in cascading waves. The ground shook. The 11 people standing in front of the wall died instantly. The blast wave hit them at supersonic speed, followed by a wall of shrapnel moving at 3,000 feet per second. Bodies were torn apart, thrown backward, scattered across the intersection. The boom box skittered into the street. Destroyed. The camcorder flew 30 feet, landing in pieces. Beer bottles shattered. Spray paint cans ruptured. The entire event lasted 1.3 seconds from detonation to silence. What remained was carnage. The wall, William Hammond's memorial to 17 forgotten neighbors, no longer existed. In its place was a crater 3 feet deep and 12 feet wide. Bricks and debris covered the intersection. The bodies of 11 people lay in grotesque positions, some intact, some not, all motionless. Tamika Douglas, standing slightly behind the group, survived. She'd been thrown to the pavement by the blast wave, her ears ringing, her face cut by flying glass, but alive. She lay there screaming, looking at what remained of Ray, unable to process what she was seeing. Sharon Cole survived with severe injuries, her legs shattered by debris. She would spend 6 months in the hospital and never walk without a cane again. The rest were dead before they hit the ground. From the warehouse window, David watched the smoke clear. Marcus had turned away, hand over his mouth. Isaiah was crying, repeating, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." David felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no emotion at all. Just the cold certainty that he'd completed his mission, defended his father's honor, sent the message he'd intended to send. "We need to leave," Marcus said. "No," David said. "What?" "We stay. We wait for the police. We don't run from this." "David, we just killed 11 people. I know exactly what we did." They walked down from the warehouse, out through the service door, and stood on the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds. The street was chaos. People running from their houses, screaming, calling for ambulances. Someone yelling that it was a gas explosion, a terrorist attack, a bomb. David stood 30 feet from the crater, hands at his sides, waiting. Mrs. Washington appeared from the crowd, saw David standing there, understood immediately. She stopped, hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "David, what did you do?" she asked. "What I had to," he said. The first police car arrived at 8:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the explosion. Then another. Then another. Within 10 minutes, the entire intersection was surrounded by emergency vehicles, officers, paramedics trying to help people who were beyond help. A detective named Rodriguez approached David, saw him standing calmly amid the chaos, covered in dust but uninjured. "You live around here?" Rodriguez asked. "Yes, sir," David said. "What happened?" "I rigged the wall with explosives, waited for them to come back. Then I detonated it." Rodriguez stared at him. "What?" "The wall they vandalized. It was my father's memorial. They came back to vandalize it again. I killed them." Rodriguez pulled his weapon. "Get on the ground! Get on the ground now!" David complied, lying face down on the pavement, hands behind his head. Marcus and Isaiah were beside him. All 3 brothers on the ground, surrounded by officers, the wreckage of the memorial wall scattered around them, like the fragments of their father's legacy. As they cuffed him, David turned his head and looked at the crater. The wall was gone, completely destroyed. Every brick shattered, every name obliterated. The memorial William Hammond had spent 4 months building no longer existed. David had killed 11 people to defend it, and in doing so, he'd destroyed it himself. The irony was so complete, so perfect, that David almost laughed. The investigation took 3 weeks. ATF agents reconstructed the device from fragments, marveled at its sophistication, traced the components back to David's purchases. FBI agents interviewed witnesses, documented the vandalism, established motive. Prosecutors assembled an overwhelming case: 11 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of use of explosives, multiple counts of conspiracy. The evidence was undeniable. David confessed immediately. Marcus confessed. Isaiah confessed. There was no question of guilt, only the question of penalty. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, David's detailed confession. They showed the jury photos of the victims before and after. T. Jensen, who'd just bought the Nikes he'd wanted. Jerome Little, who'd ironed his shirt for a job interview he'd never attend. Ray Douglas, whose daughter would be born without a father. Dante Cole, who'd never propose. Kevin Washington, who'd never start college. Rashad Turner, whose grandmother waited for money that never came. The defense argued extreme emotional disturbance, institutional failure, a community abandoned by law enforcement that forced residents to defend themselves. They presented evidence of the vandalism, the police department's refusal to help, the collapse of social structures that should have prevented the conflict. They painted David as a tragic figure, a good man pushed beyond breaking by a system that had failed him at every level. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all 11 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced David Hammond to 11 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Marcus Hammond received the same sentence as an accomplice. Isaiah Hammond, who'd participated minimally and cooperated with investigators, received 25 years. "Mr. Hammond," Judge Morrison said at sentencing, looking at David, "I've read the letters from your neighbors. I understand the circumstances that shaped your life. I understand the failure of our institutions to protect communities like yours. But understanding does not excuse. You eliminated 11 people. You destroyed 11 families. You took futures that were not yours to take. Worse, you destroyed the very memorial you claimed to be defending. Whatever honor you believed you were protecting, you lost it the moment you chose murder. And in the end, you have nothing. The wall is gone. Your family is destroyed. 11 people are dead. And for what?" David stood silent. He had no answer. The memorial wall at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds was never rebuilt. The crater remained for 6 weeks until the city filled it with dirt and gravel. On September 14, 1994, 6 months after the explosion, the city began demolition of the surrounding area for a proposed highway expansion project. Interstate 70's northbound lanes would be widened, they said. The project was necessary for traffic flow. The demolition took 3 hours. A crew of 4 men with a backhoe cleared the entire corner, hauling debris to a landfill in Bridgeton. Any remaining fragments of William Hammond's memorial were mixed with general construction waste and buried. The highway expansion never happened. Budget cuts killed the project in 1997. The corner remained empty, a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. Eventually, the city sold it to a developer who built a dollar store. The dollar store failed in 2003. The building sat empty for 12 years before being demolished in 2015. Today, nothing remains to indicate that anything significant ever happened at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds. No marker, no memorial, no acknowledgement of the 17 neighbors William Hammond honored, or the 11 people David Hammond killed. Tamika Douglas gave birth to Keisha on July 18, 1994. She raised her daughter alone, working 2 jobs, never remarrying. Keisha grew up with a photograph of her father on the mantle, a young man smiling at a camera, holding a basketball, looking like he had a future. On Keisha's 16th birthday, Tamika told her what happened. Keisha didn't speak to her mother for 3 days, processing the information that her father had been murdered over graffiti on a wall. Sharon Cole spent 6 months in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. She never walked properly again. The engagement ring Dante had hidden in his sock drawer was found by his mother while cleaning out his apartment. His mother gave it to Sharon at the funeral. Sharon wore it on a chain around her neck for 7 years before she could bring herself to put it away. Jerome Little's mother kept his acceptance letter to community college in a frame above her television for the rest of her life. She'd look at it every morning, reading the words, "We are pleased to inform you," until they became meaningless sounds, just shapes on paper representing a future that never arrived. Kevin Washington's family held his funeral on his 20th birthday. The birthday cake his mother had ordered sat untouched at the reception, candles unlit. Marcus Boyd's mother canceled his birthday party. The German chocolate cake mix sat in her pantry for 3 years before she could bring herself to throw it away. Rashad Turner's grandmother waited 3 weeks for her $40 payment before she understood it would never come. She died 6 months later in a nursing home, her bills unpaid, her medicine unaffordable. Antonio Price's mother never received the message David had intended to deliver. She spent years wondering if her son's last thoughts were of her. The families of the victims filed wrongful death suits against the Hammond estate. The house on Heber Street was sold to cover partial settlements. It sold for $18,000, divided 11 ways, approximately $1,636 per family. The amount couldn't cover a funeral. It couldn't replace a father, a son, a brother, a friend. Mrs. Washington moved away from Hebert Street 6 months after the explosion. She couldn't stand looking at the empty house, couldn't handle the memories of watching David grow from a boy into a man, then into something she didn't recognize. She died in 2003 at a nursing home in Jefferson County. At her funeral, someone mentioned that she'd once tried to warn David Hammond. She tried, the person said. She really tried. Was David Hammond a murderer? Yes. He eliminated 11 people with premeditation and calculation, rigging an elaborate ambush that turned his father's memorial into a weapon of mass destruction. Kevin Washington would never start college, would never become an auto mechanic, would never have the chance to build something with his own hands. Dante Cole would never propose to his girlfriend, would never see her face when she said yes. Ray Douglas would never hold his daughter, never teach her to ride a bike, never walk her down an aisle. Was he also a man abandoned by every institution, meant to protect him, operating under a code that once regulated communities the law wouldn't serve, defending the only thing his father left behind in a world that had taken everything else? Also, yes, the uncomfortable truth is that both things can be true simultaneously. David Hammond was a calculating killer who destroyed 11 lives and 11 families. He was also a product of systematic institutional failure, economic abandonment, and the corruption of honor codes that once meant survival. The world that created David Hammond created Tyrell Jensen too. Both men were trying to navigate the same broken system, using the only mathematics available to them. Both men made choices that seemed logical within their confined circumstances. Both men lost everything. 29 years later, David Hammond is still alive, 75 years old, serving 11 consecutive life sentences at Potosi Correctional Center. He's been denied parole 4 times. He'll die in prison. Marcus is there too. Same facility, different wing. They see each other occasionally in the yard. 2 old men who destroyed their lives defending a pile of bricks that no longer exists. Isaiah was released in 2019 after serving 25 years. He lives in Springfield now, working at a grocery store, using a different last name. He doesn't talk about his brothers. He doesn't talk about the wall. He doesn't talk about March 19, 1994. When co-workers ask about his past, he says he made mistakes and paid for them. He doesn't elaborate. In interviews with a criminologist in 2012, David was asked if he regretted his actions. "Do you mean, am I sorry I killed them?" David asked. "Yes." David was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry the wall's gone," he said. "I'm sorry my father's work was destroyed. I'm sorry my brothers are in here with me. I'm sorry for what happened to the families. But do I regret defending my father's honor? No. They disrespected him. They laughed at his memory. They made a joke out of everything he built. What was I supposed to do? Walk away, the criminologist said. I did walk away, David said. That first Saturday, I walked away, and everyone saw. Everyone knew that David Hammond got disrespected and did nothing. You don't understand what that means. In my world, that's death. Slower than an explosion, but death just the same. And now? Now I'm in prison forever, and the wall's in a landfill, and my father's name is forgotten, and 11 people are dead. So I guess walking away would have been the same result, except they'd still be alive. Do you think about them? Every day. What do you think about? I think about the kid who was going to college. I think about the man who had a job interview. I think about the one with the baby coming. I think about how they were just like me, just trying to survive, just trying to make it one more day in a city that had given up on us. And I killed them anyway, because my code, my father's code, said that honor was worth more than life. But honor didn't bring my father back, didn't save the wall, didn't protect my family. It just created more bodies, more grief, more emptiness. Do you still believe in that code? David looked at the criminologist for a long time. I don't know what I believe anymore, he said, except that everything I was taught was wrong, and everything I did made it worse. And there's no way to fix it. No way to bring them back. No way to undo. March 19th, 1994. So I sit in this cell and I remember 11 faces, and I understand that I'm the monster the neighborhood tells stories about. The cautionary tale. The example of what happens when you let honor become murder. The last image is from 2023. A filmmaker researching the story visited the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds. The dollar store building was gone, demolished years earlier. The lot was empty again, overgrown with weeds and littered with trash. No marker, no plaque, no indication that anything significant ever happened there. Just weeds and broken pavement and the distant sound of traffic. The filmmaker stood there for 20 minutes, trying to feel something, trying to connect with the tragedy, trying to understand how protection could become destruction, how love for a father could kill 11 strangers, how a memorial to the dead could become their tomb. But there was nothing there, just an empty lot in North St. Louis. Just another forgotten space in a city full of them. The story of David Hammond, like the memorial wall he killed to defend, has been reduced to rubble and buried in the forgotten places where we put things too painful to remember. The 17 names William Hammond carved into concrete are gone. The 11 people David Hammond killed are remembered only by their families. The wall itself exists nowhere except in photographs and police evidence files. And at the corner of Natural Bridge and Fairgrounds, where a father once built something beautiful and a son turned it into a weapon, there is nothing, just emptiness, just silence. Just the wind moving through weeds in a vacant lot where honor died along with everyone who believed in it.